But it's been a while since I made a video on this channel. I do sporadic stuff here and there, but I wanted to touch again on the old video I made during the summer about Niger. A lot has transpired since then that I think has kind of come full circle, and I think Niger helps demonstrate on a practical level what's happening globally right now. Between Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, and what's going on in the Sahel in Western and Northern Africa. It's all connected. And in short, it's globalization is coming to an end as we know it. And it looks like the music is slowing down, and Europe, specifically Western Europe, is left holding the bag. And what I mean by that is you have to consider the world in terms of resources and supply lines. Who has access to what resources, and how do they move the resources around the world? That's what determines the global economy. That's how the world works. And we can look at what's happening in Europe to see this play out in real time. Because the existing rules-based international order, the world that we know as of right now, was built upon Western European exploration and conquest. They went out, explored the globe, established colonies that extracted resources and brought those resources back to Europe. And so you get to this point where after World War II, when Europe was fighting themselves over these resources, they finished that World War. They came with some troops, and they divvied up the world and those resources amongst themselves. And the U.S. stepped in as the almost guarantor of these supply lines, and to protect the property owners who control these resources. So, for instance, you have a diamond mine. Well, the owner of that diamond mine is going to be European, and his mine is protected by the U.S. military. And his ability to extract those diamonds and send them off to like mainland Europe, again, is protected and assured by the U.S. And so you get to this point now where the Western European economies are based on the assumption of they're going to have cheap resources that they get from the global South, cheap goods that they get again from the global South. So think about them getting cheap minerals from Africa, shipping those cheaply to Europe, refining those products, and not even refining those products, but take those resources, sending them to Southeast Asia to then make products out of those resources, ship those back to Europe, ship them around the world, right? So their business models are predicated on having access to cheap labor, cheap energy, and cheap resources. And so this is how they can maintain, and how basically the rest of the world ends up working for them, because the people who are working in the fields in Guatemala or Indonesia, okay, their productivity is really benefiting European corporations and European countries, and providing Europeans with cheaper goods, cheaper clothes. And so we've gotten to this point to where their economies are built upon that. They need that to continue. They don't make anything themselves anymore. They've outsourced their labor. So they have cheap labor from China or Southeast Asia, cheap energy that they would get from Russian oil and gas. And they need supply lines to facilitate those transfers. So think about shipping, pipelines, trucking over roads, okay, actually getting the oil out of the ground and then over to Europe. Think about how that actually transpires. So we can take the conflict in Ukraine and Russia to where Europe is reliant on the Ukrainian breadbasket. They produce a lot of grains in those fields. They're very, very valuable. The Ukrainian black soil is world renowned, and it's very, very valuable. NATO wants those fields in their economic zone. They want that grain and those seeds going to Western Europe to feed Western Europe or to feed Western Europe industry so they can make money off of it. Putin sees this as well, and he sees how NATO is an aggressor towards him. They are not his friend. So they are going to put sanctions on Russia, saying that you are not allowed to transact with the US or Western Europe. And so in that context, if Ukraine falls in the hands of NATO, well, now he no longer has access to those resources, to that grain, to that food, to their oil. And so for him, it's existential because the U.S. is threatening him with sanctions. He's threatening Russia with sanctions. Okay. So he had to mobilize to protect those fields. So he still had access to those resources. That's what it's really about. So then the U.S. and Europe said, we want those fields for ourselves. You can't do that. So we're making you a bad guy. We're going to sanction you. And we are no longer going to buy Russian gas and oil. We're going to starve your economy and not buy that from you. And this calculation normally works because no one else would buy Russian oil and gas, because if they did, they'd run afoul of the U.S., they'd run afoul of the rules-based international order, and they too would be sanctioned, so they wouldn't do it either. So the idea is to basically suffocate and starve Russia until they end up playing ball to the way that the West likes, and then they'll allow them to transact again with the rest of the world. But there's been a shift globally with the rise of BRICS nations who are tired of dealing with this constant threat of being shut out of the international trade. And so these BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now Saudi Arabia, plus more, they have an alliance with themselves. So even if the U.S. and Western Europe decide we're not going to transact with you guys, well, they can transact with each other. So when the West decided to put sanctions on Russia and really punish them for their behavior, and they said, we're going to put a cap of we're not paying more than $60 a barrel of your oil, right? Knowing that if Russia did that, they'd be losing money on those deals. So then in comes China, and China says, we'll buy your oil and gas from you. And they did. So now you have Europe, who essentially got caught in the bluff. Now they're in trouble because their economy, which depends on cheap Russian energy, they just lost their supply of that. And it's not hurting Russia because Russia is selling all of that what they're selling to Europe. They're selling that to China now, and they're selling to Asia. So they're fine. They're still making money. It's Europe who has had their economies are being strained now because their energy costs have gone through the roof. And then you have the issue of the Nord Stream pipeline, which the U.S. blew up. So not only did they symbolically blow up their trade relationship between Russia and Europe by really instigating this war, well, then they cut off the actual pipeline. So even if they do fix relationships between Russia and Western Europe, they can't just turn the pipeline back on. It's destroyed. So the only way that they can get in that energy now is through land shipping, over trucks, over railways, or through shipping. And I bring up shipping right now because it's interesting, is right now there is, because of the conflict in Palestine, of the Israeli ethnic cleansing of Palestine, you have a backlash in the global South and the Arabic world against the West, against Western Europe and the US about this campaign. And you have in Yemen, you have the Houthis who have now destabilized the shipping routes to the Red Sea. And it's gotten to the point to where insurance rates have gone through the roof, like 200-300%, in order to ensure your shipments going through the Red Sea and going through the Mediterranean, basically going by Israel. So in order to get access to Russian gas now, you have to ship it. You have to ship it through West Asia, the Middle East, which is in conflict right now, which is going to cost you money. Or you can ship it, to Israel through the Red Sea and Mediterranean, which again, you'd pay higher insurance costs. It's going to cost you more money. Or you can go around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, which extends your trip by about 40%, which incurs additional fuel costs to move those ships to that longer distance, which again puts pressure on the economy because it puts more price pressure. Again, these economies are built on the assumption of access to cheap labor, cheap energy, and cheap resources. And so shipping costs have gone through the roof. And remember, they're already have their energy costs gone through the roof. So these shipping companies, which can now charge more, have to buy more fuel, which has now gone up. So they pass on those expenses to the ultimate ultimate final buyer, which is European businesses and countries. And so then we get back to this interesting dynamic here of Europe needs gas. They can still get it from Russia, but they'd have to, one, play nice with Russia, two, compete with Asia now for that gas, and then three, ship it over there. All things have made the price gone up multiples. Or they can buy gas from the US, which quite is kept as the biggest fossil fuel producer in the world. So we had an alliance with Western Europe and the US, and it appears that alliance is now fading because the interests are no longer aligned. The US is a producer, Europe is a consumer. They're a customer now. They're no longer a partner. We have our own energy that we're willing to sell to them. And all this war done so far has made the US energy competitive with Russian energy in the European markets. So they're being squeezed. Their other option for oil is Western Asia and the Middle East, which they're losing control of because BRICS has Iran and Saudi Arabia in it. So not only do they control the large oil fields in the Middle East, but most importantly, they control the trade routes through those regions. You're not getting any goods and services through out of Asia without going through Iran. It's just logistically not going to happen. So you can see why the US is agitating with war with Iran, because really Iran is like a chokehold in that region, and you need their cooperation to get anything through. So then we get back through to Niger. And last time we checked on Niger, there was a coup where the Western-backed puppet, Bazoum, was ousted. And there was a lot of conversations about who's really behind this. Is a Russian-backed coup. These people just want it for themselves, and really, Bassoum was democratically elected. We need to get him back in power, and yada 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 yada. All right. So since then, it's been interesting. One of the narratives was that France was paying above market rates for uranium from Niger. And Niger uranium accounts for about a third of all of France's energy needs. So it's a major part of their economy and their infrastructure, getting this cheap uranium from Niger. Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world, under extreme poverty. And one of the narratives was that France was paying above market rates to Niger for the uranium, kind of out of charity, kind of because they know that if they didn't have that, they wouldn't have anything. And so really, France is doing them a favor by doing this. And that was a lie. French controlled companies own the mine and they own the infrastructure to get that uranium out of there. They also controlled the market, where France was the seller and buyer of this uranium. It wasn't open to anybody else. So they could claim they were paying above market rates, but that was never the case. Well, since then, the Nigerian economy has exploded as the price of their sold uranium has gone through the roof, because now they're actually selling on the open market. And you can see why France was panicking about losing control over Niger, because now they lost control of the supply line. And now they have to compete with other countries for that uranium, which again puts pressure on their energy costs. And then finally, with Niger, which kind of brings it all full circle, is there's been talks for years of a trans-Saharan pipeline to bring Western African oil onto the European continent. Okay, now remember, the Nord Stream already got blown up, and the cost of shipping has gone to the roof because you can't guarantee its safety anymore. And you have to use BRICS-controlled ports in South Africa, or now a BRICS-controlled canal zone in the Mediterranean. And so there's been this talk of this pipeline. And this pipeline runs through, you guessed it, Niger. So they need their cooperation. And right now, Niger is thriving, and they are thriving while they've been cutting off contact and cooperation with the West and the US. And they've gone deeper into the relationship with China and Russia, which have been proven to be actually mutually beneficial and not extractive like the one they had with the West, like with France. So this is a long meandering take right here, journey we went on. But these are kind of like my thoughts about the end of 2023, kind of where we're at geopolitically. This conflict in Palestine, I think, it's built up to a crescendo where the Western world is starting to realize the world as it actually exists and not the dream they've been sold, while at the same time they are realizing, like I said at the beginning, that the music is starting to stop and they don't have a chair right now. They don't grow their own food. They don't make their own clothes. They don't extract their own resources. And they no longer own foreign resources. They have to pay foreign rent extractors now at almost every single point. when over the past 200 to 400 years, they controlled all those points. They benefited off all that rent. And that's coming to an end. And the U.S. is in a death march with Israel as the mask is coming off. You are seeing the world starting to distance itself from the U.S. and Israel. You are seeing Europe starting to realize their interests no longer align with the U.S. Just like in Niger, when France was floundering and needed help, the U.S. did not throw them a lifeline. They let them drown. And then once they drowned, the U.S. stepped in and tried to take control for themselves. They refused to call it a coup because coup has legal ramifications. If they were to call it a coup, the U.S. is then under their own rules cease giving aid to Niger. And France was begging them to call it a coup because they needed help. They needed military help that the U.S. would not provide them because the U.S. wouldn't call it a coup. Once France threw in the towel and vacated, then the U.S. called it a coup, and they started deploying troops to control the area. And that's just a warning and an example to what's coming, what's increasingly coming. Just like the U.S. blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. All that did was put additional pressure on Western Europe. And it increased the value of U.S. energy and oil. So that's it for today. These are gonna be sporadic. These come off the cuff. I just felt like talking about this today. I'd like to do more content like this, but I just like talking, getting things out my chest. Got a lot of thoughts and opinions. So if any of this resonated with you, please let me know. Any of this sounded ridiculous or biased or just off base, please let me know. Let's talk. Let's dialogue. These are just my thoughts. I don't know everything. I don't even know a lot. So no ego involved. Tear it apart. Let's get into it though. But have a happy new year, and thanks for listening to my rant.